A Sweet Taste of Cake by The Descendant. Chapter 10. The Stand. As the broken foundation of the gingerbread house stood before them, Cupcake and Carrot Cake faced any number of decisions. The broken foundation sat on the clear white countertop, while the forlorn gingerbread itself stood on its section, an upturned baking rack pressed into a new function. Both awaited their choice. There were many possible ways of going about the repair, but one must be chosen. One course of action must be called upon, or the whole project could soon be reduced to rubble. The two ponies looked at one another. In an instant, Cupcake was going through the various cupboards. Carrot saw her gathering up ginger, nutmeg, and cloves. Carrot realized what she was doing. He saw the look of depression across her face as she began to make her plans. Cupcake was preparing to make more gingerbread, to start a new batch. She looked at him and began to speak. At that moment, new voices rang out in the showcase room. At once, they both turned towards the door, but she pointed once more to the frosting that stood stoutly on his nose. The two looked at one another, she painting a small smile of comfort, and then quickly went to see to the customers. Carrot turned back to the gingerbread house. She saw the ingredients that she had begun to lay out. She wanted to take the safe route, the route that would lead to the foundation being remade and reset. But he knew that would take time. Time to knead, time to chill, time to shape the dough and bake it. Time was already working against him. Carrot took a deep breath and looked around his kitchen. Their kitchen. Upon the table stood the various utensils that they had been using sat, some already covered with the sticky remains of dough, or coated with the same batch of frosting that had still remained on his nose. If they wished they had to have this project done in time to present it, to capture the meaning of what this special order meant for them, they would need time. They did not have time to begin anew. He would make the decision. He would go forward right now as he best knew how. Carrot looked to the baking rack where the long discarded pieces they had broken off the gingerbread stood. To his alarm, he heard the gingerbread house give the slightest of creaks, heard it begin to protest the absence of its critical component. With that, he grabbed up the trimmed gingerbread and was grateful that he had not thrown them away. As he did, he laid them on the old broken foundation, measuring them against the cracked surface. In one motion, he lifted the bowl of fake frosting, the same that she used to make the dollop that still rested on the nose. He began to rebuild that foundation, Carrot making his choice, deciding to force Yuzu and bring the project back around. He would find a way they could go forward together without surrendering all the work that they had won. It had been a miserable 2 weeks. The mud of early spring still clung to ponies as they walked down the street. As they entered the bakery, their cursory efforts to wipe the mud from themselves failed to win anything but the slightest of false smiles from Carrot. As he mopped up after them, he wondered if his customers were intentionally avoiding walking down the cobblestone streets to give him something to do. It was as though the ponies who walked out of his bakery with their cakes and croissants were attempting to draw him out of his reflection, help him avoid the realization of what was happening around him. The bakery was empty. She was not there. It was far, far, far more than just helping her hose that he missed. Knaps had taken her back. It had been wonderfully understanding and quick to offer her a spot on the staff to one who had proven her worth before. Carrot had actually met her, Cupcake bringing her employer around to meet him, see the bakery that they had been working so very hard to establish, and been trying so very hard to give a strong foundation. As he showed Knaps around, he could sense the unicorn beginning to understand that something had gone wrong, that there was something hovering between them. As they had wished her goodbye, they stood in the doorway. Standing there in the spot where they had shared their first kiss brought to mind how far they had come together, how far they still had to go. He lowered his head to her and made little motions to ask for her touch. She replied just as willingly as ever, still sought his contact, but the heaviness was still there. No matter how gently he rolled his nose to hers, no matter how lightly he touched his face to hers, the fear would not come out. He could not draw the worry out of her. What else is a stallion for? Cupcake, he worried. There has to be some way. I mean, if we talk to your father... Can't, she breathed as she laid her head against his withers. My father sees the world in two ways. You're either a family and friend, or an enemy waiting for your chance. He slowly began to sway, let his motion rock her as she spoke of growing up in a house where the love of her father, strong and palpable, could in a moment descend into a whirlpool of rage and wrath that would send her and her siblings galloping into their rooms in fear. Though never directed at them unless in the most dire situations, such as when her older brothers had been playing with fireworks or burnt down the barn, it was still what surrounded them. As the two ponies swayed there, Cupcake told him about all the ponies who had stolen from her father, how his cynicism ruled him, made him see the world in white and blood red. He loves me, Carrot. Loves me as any father does, she said as she moved her head from his withers and once more placed him in the hollow of his chest. I'm his little Cupcake. With that, she told him of those days after her mother had begun having her seizures. Told him about how her body had begun to fail around her as the magic of the Pegasus sought her. Sat upon her Pegasus genes that lay hidden deep within the Earth Pony. In those deep, dark days, she had found her father sitting in the living room, staring deep into the fireplace. My father doesn't cry, Carrot. I've never seen him cry a day in my life, but... Quiet had hung around the house, and as she pondered the massive form of her father, he had given a single sob. The feeling of uselessness ripped out of Quarry and filling the room. She had realized that her father was feeling weak, feeling powerless. These were the two emotions that he had sought his whole life to avoid, and now the mare he had loved most in the world was ill. There was no way he could help her, make her well and complete again. What else is a stallion for? With that, Cupcake had gone into the kitchen, decisive and thoughtful as always, and after an hour, she had brought out 2 cupcakes. She presented him, one for her and one for her father. He had gathered his daughter to him and grasped her in a massive hug. As her father praised his little Cupcake, there had been a sound of falling stars sliding across a frozen lake, and she had felt quicksilver falling down her flank. It had been worth waking her mother, waking Wishing Well so that way she could see Cupcake's new mark. It was only after lying with her mother and father in bed, happily wrapped in their mutual embrace, that she had realized that she had forgotten to actually eat the cupcake. As Cupcake and Carrot sat in the doorway, swaying back and forth in harmony, he realized that her father, and he shared at least one thing. They both loved Quarry's daughter. Both loved the rosy-eyed mare who rested against him lightly. It was a lunch for the Hay Council today, 2 weeks after she had begun helping again with Knaps. She would need to be off soon to the barn where old ponies would stand around discussing things over which she had no interest. Reluctantly, she lifted her head from his chest, lifted her nose to him once more. And he answered. He felt her make the motion that invited that much more. Soon, their kisses drew them to one another. As they did, Carrot fought to drag some of the pain and worry out of her. Asked with the feel of his lips for her to surrender some of it. And let him take away some of the burden she felt. As he stood, she looked at him with her wonderful smile. He stood there on 3 legs and watched as she disappeared into the crowded streets of Ponyville. He watched where she had disappeared for a long time. His kiss had once more failed to achieve its purpose. The morning rush was over, and as noon approached, he began to put away the baking tools that had dried on the dish rack. He closed up the display cases so that way the new bumbling flies would not find their way to what he had made, to the delicate frosting and glazes that sat glistening on his creations. With that, he put away the mop and instead swept the floor with a broom, carefully catching up all of the dried dirt and dust that laid in the hidden places of his bakery. With that, he flung the broom into the closet so that way it would rattle around and fell out upon the floor. He kicked at it, sounds of frustration falling out of him as it did. He then flipped on the sign of the door back in an hour, and he cursed and made his way upstairs. He trotted straight into his bedroom, threw himself upon his bed. He stared at the ceiling for a long time, maybe an hour, without thinking of anything. When he began thinking again, it was about his failure to lift that worry from her. She was worried about her father. She was also worried for him. She was worried for Quarry, her father that she loved and was afraid of. She was worried for Carrot, her partner and deepest friend that she loved and was afraid for. She was worried about them, these two players in the game of this. Her fears, hopes, dreams, love. These all coalesced in the form of these two stallions. Stallions she was concerned for and troubled over. He did not want her trouble. He wanted her happy, smiling, and radiant. He wanted to see the sharp dash of her eye when she was being devious. He wanted to see the way her shoulders came up, and the little wicked smile that went across her face when she was scheming some small happy scheme. He wanted to hear the sound of her hooves across these floors, hear her voice calling to him across the kitchen as she became filled with ideas. He wanted to hear how her day had gone. Wanted her to confide everything with him. She wanted to hear her giggles and laughter. He wanted to have her near him. Wanted to have her breast beside him when she was happy. Wanted her to lean against his chest and find strength there when she was sad and bothered. He simply wanted to feel her approach, know that in an instant his nose would be to hers, and soon after his lips would be to hers. The feel of her coat went through him. The feel of her hoof touching to his went to him as he closed his eyes and sighed out loud to the lonely room. Carrot turned on his side and thought of the times that she had wanted him to lie here with him upon the bed, how close she had been. Those moments when she had lain in his forelegs, the reach of their bodies touching to one another. Those had been the great reward for him. To feel her so safe with him, knowing that touched to the crux of his body she had been secure and content. That was all he wanted from her, that she let him wash the concerns out of her, fill her life with happiness, shelter, love. That was fading away. He was losing that. It should have been cathartic for her. It should have been liberating to let him know who was his opponent in the long games he had been playing. It had not been. Instead, it had been though her fears were now alive. Her grim vision of this competition between her father and her lover had now hovered over her in a thick, vicious cloud. He shuddered to think of how strong it must have been within her this whole time. How often she must have reflected upon the images of him suffering under the words of Quarry. He wished that she had told him sooner, felt that perhaps he had not seemed strong enough. He was strong. He may not seem it, but he knew his strength. He knew he was strong. It was not a physical strength, but he was strong. He had essentially raised himself, in some senses even kept his mother alive as she had faltered and failed her attempts to fill the void within her. He was strong. He ran his hoof over the side of the bed, knew that no matter how strong he was, it was not going to help. He would lose her if this continued. Their love was strong, but it would be smothered under her fear. The persuasive fear that even his freely given kisses and embraces would not lift. He stood, sighed once more. Before him, the damnable leather lay still on the floor, where she had dropped it 2 weeks ago. He looked at it. Quarry's signature now stood upon their relationship like the dead albatross hung around the neck of a condemned mariner. He sighed again and went down the stairs. He reached for the back in an hour sign, but the instant he put a hoof upon it, he was caught up in the remembrance. He looked upon Ivory, sitting there in the sun in the front of the window as she spoke to him. Told him some of the truths of the games of this. At that moment, he remembered what she had told him, a promise he had made not to reveal Ivory's entreat to a cupcake. To win the game, Carrot. She said, "All you have to do is be yourself. You're set up to win. Everyone in this town wants you to desperately win. I want you to win. Cupcake needs you to win." Carrot gasped at his own memory, realized that how right Ivory had been. As his recollection rolled around, his mouth moved in concert with Ivory's. He remembered her words, only then beginning to truly understand what he had been saying. "Do not tell Cupcake I said this in any other circumstances. You do not always have to wait for permission. At times, it could even be fatal. This time, the time will come to win this, as you call it. You may have to let your love guide you." As he remembered Ivory's hug, the want and wish she had conveyed for her best friend settled through him. With that, a thought went through Carrot. He could not always be the pawn, the piece being moved. He would have to make a move, have to be the one to advance the action of the game. The relationship could not survive long if she was so worried. She could not endure the facade that she had built. She did not want to keep up the farce. He knew she would be crushed under it. The longer a lie is drawn out, the worse it becomes. 2 years of this would wound her. His other words shot through him. The worry that she had given Cupcake as he had hidden in the doorway. Love could be drowned, lost. No, he would not allow it. He would risk all on a throw of the dice, make a surprise move. He would save her from worry, if not through his quiet embrace and soft touch, then through the shouts and rage of her father. He would risk all they had built on a single throw, letting it come crashing down. Carrot scampered up the stairs, grabbed up the letter, and once more pelted down them. Quickly he turned the sign closed and threw the door open. For some odd reason, he decided on a bathroom break. This would prove fortuitous. Before stepping out into the afternoon, he turned and looked back at the bakery. Streams of causality leaped out and laid before him in loose tangles, any one of them being the endpoint of what he was now undertaking. Some ended with him returning to this place, a broken, weeping, bleeding mess. Some ended with her mad at him, begging him to tell her why he had done it, wondering how they could go on with her father mad at them both. Some ended with him hobbling around this bakery years from this day, leaning on a cane. One alone ended with him never returning. Ended with shocked whispers outside the door, evoking an unspeakable crying. Yet some ended with him looking into the rosy eyes, feeling her soft kiss that planted upon him as her hoof lay across his back. He felt a tender nibble on his ear, and the sound of her giggles echoing around the bakery, along with the soft laughter of 2 young fillies. With that vision upon him, he leapt out into the early afternoon. Quarry was working the garden patch, trying to get good earth to accept his offering of the old eggshells. Plants need calcium, or so he was told. Being as he was an earth pony, Quarry dug deeper, trying to call upon the magic that had served him in business, anchoring him both in times of thought and in times when he was without the calmness that now supposedly floated over him. Supposedly, in reality, all he really felt was an instant dislike for eggshells. He was an earth pony. He called upon that connection now. He asked the magic to flow through him to the earth, and through the earth to him in return. As he worked through the garden patch, he simply felt himself digging deeper, feeling his muscles working as his strength played out through the soil. The garden had been suggested by Ledger, and encouraged by Wishingwell. It was an attempt to help him find something to deal with the wrath that he knew was too far inside him to ever be truly removed. Instead of the calm that they had assured him would follow when he had begun this project, all he really felt was a bizarre sort of self-consciousness, an embarrassment that came from nowhere as he realized that he had spent nearly an hour in the hot spring sun digging a trench about 4 feet deep and 6 long to bury 4 eggs worth of crushed shells. Good afternoon, came a small voice, one that was familiar and instantly greeting. Good afternoon, Mr. Quarry, sir. It rose again. Quarry turned to face the gate. The face of the cake cult stood there, staring over the fence. Corey studied the colt for a second. As he did, he saw Cake lift a paper hat, one he assumed he only wore around his bakery.
"Cake!"
he answered, using his rear loops to move the big metal watering can around the pile of dirt. His gaze fell over the colt once more, and Cake lowered the hat as he withered. Corey walked down to the gate, his dirty hose thudding across the path. Corey looked over the gate and down at Carrot as the smaller stallion tried to smell him back.
"Ain't never seen you at this end of the city before,"
spoke Corey, looking past Carrot. "No, sir," said Carrot as he gulped a little. "I've only come as far as the lamppost. As far as the lamppost or so. Don't want to risk you seeing. I mean, I don't want to disturb you too much." Corey's eyes fell back down on the colt, his gray eyes meeting the green of the colt in an impassive glance.
"What do you want, Cake?"
he said in a small breath that washed over Carrot, filling his nose. I've got to ask a favor," said Carrot, knowing right away it was the wrong word to choose. Carrot sensed right away that for this stallion, favors were for friends. Business only meant deals, contracts, and backstabbing. Actually, sir, I need your permission for something important," said Carrot as he quickly rephrased his words and the gray eyes narrowed upon him. Rather than to continue under the threat of those eyes, Carrot pulled the letter out from under his hat. He held it up in his mouth so that Corey could see the conversation was going to be about. Corey closed his eyes and gave a sneer. To Carrot's surprise, he turned and walked a few paces back toward what looked like either a garden or a construction project and pawed at the earth.
"I don't talk about business at my home, Cake,"
Corey said as he looked deep into the wiring can. He realized he had forgot to bring any water. As the Cake colt continued, he put aside that insight as his teeth began to grate. I'm sorry, sir, but it's really important, you see. I like for you to continue with my loan. I like you to keep it instead of sell it to the new company," Carrot called, lifting his voice slightly to reach Corey where he now stood. The tan coat of the older stallion standing out in contrast to the black of the turned earth.
"Why would you want a fool thing like that, Cake?"
called Corey, making a single agitated stomp that left a deep print in the pile of dirt.
"Says right there on the letter why it'd be better for you to go with them slick colts."
"Yes, sir," answered Colt. Carrot, lifting the cap again and placing the letter beneath. But it's kind of important to me that you know I'm responsible. It's really important to me that you know I keep my promises, that I take care of what's important to both." Carrot stopped as he saw Corey stomp again and turned down the path back to the gate as his newly blackened hose sounded out loud.
"Damn it, Cake!"
called Corey. He'd always doubted the Colt's business savvy, but this was simply too much. Now he would want to go on and explain about how he wanted Corey's trust for this or that, and soon they would be discussing chain stores or Carrot Cake World Outlet or some fool notion. It was all the same. They were all the same. He was not going to deal with it. He was gardening.
"You ain't making a lick of sense,"
he told the Colt with his voice just on the safe side of a shout.
"If you stick with me, that'll cost me about 450 bits. You'll cost yourself more in the end, and I ain't going to listen to no excuses when that bakery of yours goes under, because you ain't got no horse sense."
Corey turned and looked back to his garden. As he heard Cake stuttering, he looked at the trench that he had dug for the 4 eggshells. As Cake began to speak again, Corey found himself picturing burying something slightly more amber color and underbitten in his garden. It was about to get beyond the image, barely, by the time Carrot spoke again. I'm not going to fail," he said, sounding ever so slightly more confident than he had. "I've got a partner who is smart. We're going to make it. All I'm asking is that I'm let me prove myself to you." Carrot looked up to see Corey already back at the gate, breathing heavily as his eyes once more fell over him.
"Cake,"
spoke the stallion in a disparaging hiss,
"this is the last time I'm going to tell you. I don't talk about business at my home. Yeah, get back to your partner. I'm gardening. Once you actually learn what interest means, we'll talk about it. You got a smart partner? Thanks Celestia for that. Have him explain it to you. I've got bean plans.
Sir. My partner's a mayor. The most marvelous mayor I've ever known. Corey missed a step. As he recovered, he smirked to himself. In the 6 months he had presented a loan to this cult, that was the first line he had not stuttered through. It seemed that he hit a nerve with Cake. Corey turned, his smirk still standing on his face.
Well, don't that beat all?
Said Corey in an accusing tone.
Cake's got some bacon going on in his kitchen. You butter us a buns, Cake? You worried about spreading your sanctum man as your business?
Corey smiled a harsh smile, happy to see the cult recoil if it meant he would soon be off. It was always amazing to see the Corey, that business pony who was mixing business and pleasure, would flinch when faced with the truth. Corey wondered if the mayor was married. That would be a scandal. I wish you hadn't said that, sir, said Carrot, his head still turned and his eyes closed, his head hanging toward the sidewalk. I really wish you hadn't said that, Mr. Corey. Carrot lifted his head. Corey lifted his head. Cake was suddenly not stuttering. Suddenly he seemed almost offended, hurt, defensive. Interesting. Corey tested the waters, wanted to see how far he could push the cult before he would finally pelt off, and finally trying to fish whatever Cake wanted out of him.
What's the matter, Colt? You ain't got no trouble coming around to my house asking about business? But when I want to know what you're mixing up with that mayor, you
Cupcake. The name fell out of Carrot. It hung around the fence post before tipping over and crashing around Corey's hooves. The name splintered around them into as many pieces as the eggshells that sat nearby. Carrot opened his eyes and looked up to see a shaking, trembling Corey. The stallion's mouth hung open, his teeth staying in the air as hissing breaths fell between them. He did not look into the stallion's eyes. A moment of silence for our dear fallen Carrot people. He was a noble character. Cupcake, he said as he closed his eyes, picturing her in his head. Your daughter Cupcake is my partner, sir. We've been working together since before we opened the bakery. Before that, even. She was with me when I first sent Puff inside. Went with me when I went to sign the papers, but she's far more important to me than that. Far more important, sir. We've been seeing each other for almost a year, since before you met me at the mill. We're dating, sir. Close. Intimate. Carrot opened his eyes as he looked upon Corey. He was reminded of something extraordinary he had once seen, something that had stuck inside him since the day he had witnessed it. One day at the mill, the entire staff had been drawn together on the first floor to witness a test. As Tremel dropped the sandbag, the primary safety mechanism of the mill sprang to life. The device was simple, and it needed to be. If a life was in danger, a cult or failure being pulled through the machines, then the device was all that could possibly save their life. As the bag dropped, it pulled the brakes into place. Throughout the mill, the belts came loose, some flopping horribly, all raising cacophony. Wheels dropped for their active positions into their safety modes, sending a rattling, clanging through the mill that bounced off the walls and made the ponies cover their ears. Psst. Outside, the mill wheel came to a resolute and immediate halt. As it did, the water from within splashed about in a white torrent, went streaming alongside the mill as the power of the river now splashed against the building, the thrum of it reaching them as drove the thick walls of bricks. If Carrot thought that such a horrific collection of sights and sounds could be captured in a facial expression, then the one Corey now represented it fully. I want you to keep my load, so I could prove that I could take care, began Carrot. He was very quickly made to stop. Before he could even understand what happened, himself fighting for breath. Beneath him, the cold stones reached up to his chest, and at once the stinging began. Looking to his chest, abdomen, and legs, he saw many tiny scratches. The raw spots soon erupted into blood that showed through his coat in long lines. Karen felt something on him. As he looked beneath his forelegs, he saw black dirt clinging to his coat as well. Quarry had pulled him over the gate, bodily lifted him along its surface, and dropped him into the stones in one razing bellow. Carrot regained his senses, thus as if in heavens, Quarry's wrath began to settle over him. In the space of seconds, all of the horrors that had shot through his mind since that first day at the mill when he had seen the stallion use his rays now descended upon him. He tried to go limp.
"You son of a bitch!"
called Quarry as he knocked the paper hat from Carrot's head, sending it and the lender tumbling across the yard.
"You son of a bitch! You're no different than any of them! No bucket different than any of the slimy colts weaseling into our lives! Just another bastard who's using my cupcake to try to get to me! Coming around here acting all sincere!"
"Now, sir, please," began Carrot, trying to make for his hooves. No sooner had he found his way to his hooves than came another roar. Carrot felt himself slam against the gate. He heard the long, thick metal bars bounce and clang in response to his body being driven against him. He felt himself thrown against him once again as Quarry's voice began to rise higher. Carrot's head went back as he felt himself shoved amongst the gates once more. The force of Quarry's shoves lifting him off his hooves, his head bouncing off the bars with a metallic clang. Carrot fought for a breath as the stars passed through his vision, tried to steady himself. It was not to avail. Quarry was upon him, driving him up the path.
"You bugged piece of crap! What did you tell her? What did you do to get away with it? She knows all about your type! She had to fight off goat lickers like you for years!"
spat Quarry.
"What a mess like you tell her that got to her! What did you tell her? What lies did you whisper in my little cupcake's ears? How did an underbite, stuttery prick like you?"
Carrot fell to his knees, hitting his jaw against the stone. He called out in pain, did not know if he had fallen or been kicked. Soon he felt himself dragged to his hooves. At once he was amid the turned soil of the Descendant garden, trying to stay on his hooves as Quarry raised above him. The stallion was ranting, raging. Inside, Carrot, to 1,000 different voices called for him to run, to flee, to hide for safety. One voice stood firm, though, told him that this was his stand. It spoke to him calmly as the immense stallion pelted him with his fury and leveled accusations against him.
"You ain't no different after all! No different than any of them! I told Paperclip so, coming to my office with your bacon, trying to turn her against me too! You other sucker! You sheep-bucker! Can't no expect no better for some pony wearing a bow tie!"
Quarry lifted Carrot by the caveat and looked down at the cult who he held there, watching as Carrot gasped for breath.
"No business sense! No sense in clothes! Goes hoof and hoof, you little piece of crap!"
"Okay, give it to me. I'm sorry." He choked, reaching up to his hooves to gain leverage across Quarry's as the large stallion pulled the caveat. Quarry's mouth came open. He stood aghast and rolled around. With a snarl, he lifted Carrot again, shook him again and again and again as he hung from his hooves, then dropped the smaller stallion among the dirt of the garden.
"Ain't that something? That's a damn fine garden, ain't it? Ain't it? You son of a bitch! How do you think she's gonna like hearing you came around today asking for favors, trying to use her to get something out of me?"
The dirt clung to Carrot as he tried to lift himself. Instead, he felt Quarry's legs sweep beneath his. With a tumble, he landed in a trench that Quarry had dug.
You little bastard! You piece of crap! You leave my daughter alone! You leave my family alone!
Quarry stood at him, raging at him once more. He tried to look up, but as he tried to blink the dirt out of his eyes, the afternoon sun fell over him and cast Quarry in an outline as the foam and spit of his continued anger drawled across Carrot.
Huh, coach?
He asked as his voice went high.
Where's your words now, huh? You want to stutter your way to some explanation now? Please!
Carrot cried. I Sam!
I love her!
Please! I don't want anything from your family! I just want to
leave my family alone!
brayed Quarry, kicking dirt across Carrot.
Leave us alone!
He called again as he reached for something bulky that stood nearby. Twice, 3, 4 times something large and metallic bounced off Carrot's head as he turned away. 3, 4, 5 times Quarry banged it off against Carrot's nose, calling out in hissing screams until the blood began to pour. The cult tried to raise his forelegs to defend himself, but a cursing Quarry held him down with his massive frame. In an instant, a rain of eggshells fell over Carrot as he laid in a trance. Finally, the warning kid itself bounced off his stomach, driving the air from him. Quarry lifted himself from the trench and looked back down at the heaving, filthy form of Carrot below.
You think we're done, Carrot?
He hissed.
You ain't even felt a touch of what I do to most who try to use my family against me. Try to hurt my family.
Please, came a small voice from the trench.
I'm going up to the house,
spat a sweating, heaving, shaking Quarry.
And there, I'm getting a drink. Then I'm getting my whip. If you're still here when I come out.
With that, he trotted up the path, knowing it needless to continue. Cake would run off like the rest. He was nothing special. So Cake had been like them after all. Scheming, devious bastard. He had kept Cupcake under his spell for a year. That was a sin. A proper sin. And when he told her she would be hurt, she would be hurt real bad. Mother would hold her, and in time she would heal. In time there would be a cult for her. Not one who thought of money, of using her. That hurt him to think about. As he got his drink, he could not catch his breath. He sucked down another mug of cold water, tried to get his heart to stop pounding. He hoped she would find the right cult soon. Some pony who loved her for who she was, who would never hurt her, who did not want anything from her. As the ringing in his ears began to fade, he hoped she would do it before he had a stroke or a heart attack. It was a matter, of course, but he grabbed the whip from the closet as he went back outside anyway, just in case the cult was lingering near the gate or was thinking of some explanation, just like so many others. Quarry? Came a small, still voice. He looked around to see Wishing Well in her wheelchair. She looked down questioningly, looking to where the whip stood in his mouth and then back to his eyes. He dropped it to his hoof and smiled at her even as more dirt fell from his mane.
There's a big old rat in the garden, Liv,
he said. With that, he lifted the whip once more and headed for the door. Quarry stretched, felt the sun upon him, and took a couple of deep breaths. Gardening had proven quite interesting, even if not entirely relaxing. Still, he enjoyed pulling the weeds. His great eyes settled upon the garden. As they did, he jumped in surprise. The cake cult stood there, just beside the garden on the path. He was dirty, filthy, and bleeding. Even as he stood there, the dirt of the garden fell from him, eggshells catching in his mane as he trembled and shook with a palpable fear. Quarry's jaw slid from side to side as he pondered Carrot. Upon the cult was a very discernible mark of fear. The gangly legs shook. From his head to his orange tail, the colt trembled. The teeth inside the underbite turned, the sound carrying all the way up to the ports. Only a trail of piss running down his leg to complete a scene of abject terror was present. And yet, there he stood. None of the others had been there when he had come out. Was Cake really that stupid? Corey stared out over Carrot, saw the colt's eyes force shut. As he watched the mouth come open, a familiar phrase came wordlessly from the colt's lips. "Celestia, help me." Corey tilted his head back and forth. He had begun to cry out that the Sovereign does not aid liars when a phrase wafted from Cake. "Cupcake, I'm trying so hard." Corey's jaw shifted back and forth for long minutes. With that, he gathered up the whip and trotted to where the stallion stood. As he stood before the trembling Carrot Cake, he looked the stallion over, saw how worked over he was. Scrapes, welts, dirt, blood, eggshells.
"You stupid Cake!"
he cried as Corey as he wrapped the whip around his foreleg and measured out a good striking length. "Not so much, sir," said Carrot, fighting to make the words come. Corey shook his head.
"Why in the hell are you still here, Cake? Do you think I'm alive? Do you think I won't strip the flesh from your head?"
No, sir. I mean, yes, sir. I know you'll do it, sir," Carrot said as he trembled. Cupcake told me about the other cults."
"Then Cake, damn your amber hide,"
said Corey, fixing Carrot in a gaze so hard, close to the smaller stallion's face, that his breath caught in Carrot's nose.
"Why in the world are you still here?"
Corey stepped back and was amazed to see the trembling, shaking form of Carrot Cake lift itself. He watched as the stallion fought to his full height. Even as the younger stallion shuddered in fear, his green eyes came upon and met the gray ones of Corey. "Because," came the smaller stallion's voice, fighting past every instinct of self-preservation that sat inside him. "Because I'm not like them. I love her, sir. I love your daughter. I love Cupcake. There's no sound in the world like the sound of snapping gingerbread and baking." Carrot thought of that sound as an expression went across Corey's face that was otherwise unidentifiable. Corey's jaw went from side to side as he pondered the younger stallion. "Please," added Carrot as he stood quivering upon the path. "I'm just asking that you believe me. Let me prove that." Inside Corey, a moment of doubt was replaced by an old instinct. It simply was not possible. There was no way that money and manly mixed. He wanted something. He was a convincing liar. That was all. With that, the whip cracked through the air. Carrot winced, braced himself, felt nothing.
"I'm telling you for the last time, leave my family alone, Cake!"
raged Corey, gathering the whip back to himself. "Please," whispered Carrot. With that, the whip lashed out again. This time, pain, real and powerful, fell with it as it cracked across Carrot. Carrot felt the sensation go through him, and at once the sting drove him to his knees. He felt something running down his cheek. Corey had been startled. He knew that there was something wrong. He missed. He had only met one last warning shot to crack above the stallion. But he had missed. Now he had saw the blood trickling down the ear of this odd stallion. The groove where the ear met his head when standing wet in the midday sun. He looked upon the stallion who knew laid upon his path, not knowing what to do, doubt filling him. As Corey looked on, he saw something reeling back another step. Cake fought to his hooves even as he trembled and drew upon his earth pony magic. The stallion, Cake, was using his magic, the gift of the earth, to anchor him there. Cake was using it to give him the strength to face him, not to launch a futile attack, not to flee like all the rest, but to stand there. "Please," asked Carrot as his green eyes flashed open once more. "I love her. I love Cupcake, sir. I love her so much." Corey lifted his hoof. The sound of gingerbread cracking and crumbling sat upon his features. Inside Corey, questions began to arise. What could this stallion want from him? Want from his family or Leather's family so badly that he was willing to stand there and face the whip? What could he... Is it really possible that he just... No, it isn't. That's not the way the world works. Corey lifted the whip again. No, Daddy, no! The voice looked at him as a shriek crossed 1,000 miles and reached Corey as he stood there. The gate slammed shut, and up the path came his daughter. She pelted to him as the back apron of the catering shop trailed out behind her. The eyes of both stallions fell upon her as she stripped herself of it, discarded as though it were an anchor dragging her down. "Daddy, no! Daddy, not him, please!" she wailed as he leapt down, literally wrapping herself around his hoof and dragging him down slightly with her weight.
"Cupcake,"
he said as he fought to regain himself.
"Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell about this?"
Stop it, Daddy! Just stop it!" she said, falling away from him as she tripped over her own hooves. As Corey watched, her eyes went wide with fears, beginning to fall from her as she looked upon Carrot. In a second, she gathered up the apron, was holding it to the blood trickling down his face. Corey looked on in unbelieving as the dark of the apron absorbed the crimson as she brushed the eggshells from him and said, "Oh, Carrot, why did you do this? Oh, Carrot!" over and over again. "I'm trying, Cupcake. I'm trying so hard."
"Cupcake,"
Corey said in a demanding tone.
"Why didn't you tell me you was working with him? He's just come up here and made a fool of himself trying..."
Stop it, Daddy, right now!" she called as she once more trotted over to him, tears falling from her face. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd do this. That you would believe him. That you would hurt him." An old fear grew in Corey. The knowledge that he had given his daughter a reason to fear him, raising up in a ball that sat on his throat. "Daddy," she said while nuzzling beneath Corey, "he's not like the rest, Daddy. He doesn't want anything from me. He doesn't get it around."
"You're not
"Around," came the voices of the two stallions, one firm, the other trembling. Corey met the eyes of Carrot. Some foreign feeling was growing in him as the gnarly stallion still shook and trembled upon the path. "Please, Daddy, please," she continued, still running herself alongside her father with her voice still high with worry. "Please, he isn't like the rest."
"He just wants to get to me,"
spoke the firm voice of Corey, his old instincts and the truths that he had learned throughout his hard life rising up while facing Carrot once more in a harsh gaze.
"Use you to get my money."
No! Cupcake wailed as he once more forced herself upon his foreleg, trying to get the whip to drop from where it was sat wrapped upon his hoof. "He didn't know, Daddy. He didn't know you're my father. Not until 2 weeks ago. I tried so hard to keep him from finding out. Daddy, everyone has been trying so hard, but I didn't know about the loan. Daddy, it's my fault. Please stop letting him."
"Cupcake."
Came the voice of Carrot, and it stuck in Corey's ears. It was high with worry and concern. The smaller stallion was worried for her, anxious for her. The sound of ancient assumptions and scarred beliefs tensing and beginning to falter sounded out through Corey. At once the old ways rose up and defended attempted to defend his unhappy view of the world.
You mean you got the whole town, every pony to lie to me?
Spoke Quarry. His perceptions grew wild.
To hide this from me?
Yes! She said, pussy once more beneath him, fighting her father's nuzzle, as if her voice began growing higher. She had lied to him, or at the very least hidden the truth. That was the bond that held Quarry's world together. That was the most important thing. As Quarry listed, he seemed rattled off the names of ponies he trusted, friends he relied on. They had all been playing a game. A game whose purpose was to keep him in shadow. A game whose purpose was to let this stallion get closer to his daughter. Didn't they all understand? Didn't they see? Unless,
Cupcake, why would you do this to me? To our family?
He said as his voice began to fade. Because I love him! I love him, Daddy. I love him more than any other stallion I've ever met. She wailed. He's kind and gentle, and when I'm here, near him, nothing hurts. His eyes lifted once more to Carrot Cake, saw that the stallion had his hoof raised as though he now were calling to her. It was as though he wanted to draw her pain as she circled her father, wanted to silence her fear. He was afraid for her. Carrot was upset by her fear. He was more afraid than he was afraid of Quarry to himself. Quarry's jaw shifted back and forth as he looked upon it. Carrot felt Quarry's stare upon him. He looked to the deep gray of the anger-filled eyes. He found him easier to look within, as though something were fighting there. The hunted look being pressed. Please, sir, Carrot said as some of the dirt fell from him. I love her. I love her more than anything in the world. Clay, no! Came a new voice, one that ripped Quarry's world out from under him. He turned and let the whip go limp as the figure of Whistling-Well fell down the path, free from her wheelchair, making small, delicate steps. Mama! Oh, Mama, it's Dad, Carrot! Daddy's killing him! Came the voice of Cupcake, terribly high with worry. Oh, Mama! Mama, help me! Quarry stumbled. His body had shook. Whistling-Well had known. She knew about this all along. She too had lied. The most important pony in his life had... No. He would not believe it. There had to be another explanation. He reached for Whistling-Well and tried to gather her up. To his surprise, she refused his aid. Instead, she saw it in Cupcake's exhalations. To his utter shock, she too began to demand he listen, trying to make her massive husband listen to the dirty, disheveled, bleeding, trembling stallion that stood nearby.
Cake,
he said as he spun to Carrot, his anger seeming to fade.
Leave now, before I do something in front of my family that I'll never forgive.
No, Carrot said as dirt fell through his mane. No, sir, I can't. Now I'll tell you know how much I love her. Being Quarry means that as the two mares you love most in the world circle you, this stranger, this interloper, tells you how much he loves your daughter. Being Quarry means that even as everything you have learned rages at you, demands acts of wrath, you can't move. It means that all the lessons you have learned in your hard life tell you to break him, snap at him, that he is a liar, but the ones that you love most demand you listen. Being Quarry means that as he speaks about her, you watch as his expression goes soft. You listen as the thudding slows behind your ears. As he describes how much he adores her, loves her. I understand, sir, said Carrot as he looked into the faint expression of the stallion. I understand why you feel the way I do. You do. I never had a father. He died just before I was born. Being Quarry means that he understands what it's like feeling that you need to protect something dear to you. How powerless you feel when you cannot. Being Quarry means that you could see the Earth Pony magic growing in him as he speaks of your daughter in tones that you thought only you could. As he says he only wants to see her happy, see her smiling. He begins to rip away, and everything you believe about your world. Hey! Called more familiar voices. At once, the grandchildren were coming up the path. Hey, Mr. Carrot, will you play in the garden? You're all dirty. Is that Grandpa's whip? Was he telling you tricks? Being quarry means that as your eldest daughter, Ruby Quartz, comes along the path, you see realization flash across her face as well. Soon, she too leans in to help keep your wrath from growing. You know that she too is aware of the game, that she too fears you. Being quarry means that as dozens of your worst fears are coming to pass, you cannot call upon your old familiar rage, your old anger. It means that for the first time in 42 years of relying on your brutality, you are defenseless. Being quarry means that as your daughters continue to circle you and beg you for understanding, the monster who is destroying everything you have worked for across the long decades of your life makes excuses on your behalf to your grandchildren. Oh yes, said Garrett as he tried to hide the blood trickling from above his ear, his nose, and long scrapes. We just got playing too hard. The name of your bakery is still Stinko, called the little cult. Yeah, answered Carrot as his face twisted in suspicion. Hey, why don't you guys get your school stuff, and if your grandpa and grandma say it's okay, we can play in the garden too. Being quarry means that Cupcake leaves your side and stands by Cake as the foals gathered around them. With small tears as the foals propelled past you into the house, the fortress you had built for the protection of your family. Being quarry means that you can now only beg. That is all you have left.
Please, Cake. Please,
said Quarry while his voice broke.
Please, just go.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, sir, said the gangly stallion as he turned and lifted his foreleg as he once done for Cupcake. I can't. I just want to prove to you that I love her. I just want a chance to earn your respect. Being quarry means that the word flies through you. Respect. The one word that you've been chasing all your life. Being quarry means having to realize that. As Cupcake nuzzles beneath you, it shows her affection. That Cake respects you. Respects what you would do for your family. Being quarry means that he thinks enough of you that your respect matters. Quarry lifted his head, saw the tears that Cupcake had hidden from her nieces and nephew were flowing again. Cupcake drawing his head along hers, trying to draw her pain.
She's my little Cupcake. My little Cupcake,
came Quarry's voice, as weak and withdrawn as any who stood there in the spring afternoon. I never hurt her, sir, said Carrot as he nuzzled her and lifted his eyes to Quarry. Sir, I swear, I'd never hurt her. Being Quarry means that the gangly stallion had thus shorn off all your perceptions. Cake had thus cracked it open all your fears and doubts with sledgehammer blows. Around you, the fortress that you had built was torn away, as though he had lifted every board out of the house, as though he had stolen every stone of the wall you had laid. Being Quarry means that your head drops under any sincere stare of the gangling stallion, drops so low that Wishing Well and Rose Quartz gave a small cry and attempt to nuzzle you, fearing for you. Being Quarry means that you surrender, that you give up your rage, your anger, and allow this amber-colored stallion in your life, despite the warnings that still call out within yourself. You greet him in, for the sake of your little Cupcake. And so ended the first round of the game of this. With a massive sigh, Quarry lifted his head once more, felt Wishing Well brushing up against him, and attempted to lend her her strength. The frail male stopped, looked down with a smile. It'll be all right, my love, she said, nuzzling her weak frame to him once more. It'll be all right. Quarry looked at Cake. He was a bleeding, dirty mess.
All right, Cake,
he said, something of a rumbling returning.
Let's get you up to the house, clean yourself off, and we'll have ourselves a talk.
With that, he turned and helped Wishing Well back to his house. Behind him came the hefty squeals of his youngest daughter. It could hear the two bodies fall into the garden as she pounced upon him. Hear her laughter as their noses touched together for the first time in complete freedom. Together they stood, as Wishing Well and Corey turned to watch. Something unusual happened. Carrot looked down and seemed to find one of Cupcake's hoofprints in the black soft earth. He pressed his hoof next to her imprint, leaving the two imprints standing side by side in the warm soil. Soon she had drawn a heart around both. It was hard for the old stallion to admit, but it made him happy to see it. Cupcake returned to the kitchen in anticipation of an unfolding disaster. What he discovered there was nothing short of a miracle. As he approached, he began to insert the gift within, began to raise it up on new foundation, a strong one, built of the old interlaced with many shards of what she had thought they would soon be throwing away. As Carrot lifted the piece into place, Cupcake took the confessor's tube and spread a new bed of the thickest frosting around until the foundation was once more in place. Together they once more stood there, hoof and hoof, as the gingerbread house healed itself. She looked up to him, knew he had made a decision, that he knew to move when she could not, fear to. She knew that he trusted her to do the same. It took a lot of willpower to keep from reaching across the house, keep from placing her lips to his nose and slowly lick away the frosting that still stood there. Another part of her told him that it was not time for such things. So as the foundation sat, they simply looked at each other, happy in the presence of one another. As her train pulled down into Ponyville Station, Ivory Script was presented with an extraordinary scene. True, the banner was magnificent. The small band that played her favorite songs was still very appreciated. These were very much welcomed, as welcome as the hug of her parents that she fell into as she leaped for the train. But it was the sight of Cupcake and Carrot standing together, leaning into another while Corey stood nearby. That was what made her the happiness. They had done it. As he reached for Cupcake, the two spun around happily, each crying and glad for one another. The party was held at Ledger's mansion, a massive celebration marking the return of his daughter. Though Knaps was the caterer, it had been made very clear that Cupcake was there as a guest. She was soon to finish the season as a caterer, to leave Knaps, who had supported her return, and return to the bakery alone. In the weeks that followed, she had been opening more, and Carrot stood in awe of her flowering love. As the night fell, the lanterns came alight, though not nearly soon enough to keep Carrot from tripping in the darkness and landing in the fountain whose warm waters kept the heat of the day within them as long into the night. He tried to stand up, but as he had felt the touch of her hooves upon his chest, oddly, he felt her ask for him to remain lying in those wires. Soon Cupcake was in the water too, sitting above Carrot and looking down over him. As the lanterns came alight, he saw her sparkling in their light, saw the light catch in the waters of the fountain as it trickled around them. She soon looked down over him with a blissful gaze and ran her hoof through his mane. With that, he lifted her hooves, used them to cast up the channels of water in the space between them, and then poured over him. At first, Carrot had been a little perturbed, but soon he realized what was happening, what she was expressing without words. She was using the wires to show him her feelings. She was letting the wires that made up her emotions, feelings, and thoughts cascade over him. She was showing him what her love would be like, how he could expect it to feel as she opened up more and more, as he grew into her newfound freedom from worry. The well of souls, it is said, is like swimming without being tired. It is as though you were awash in love of itself, as though love were wires that surround you and fill you, wires that you yourself had spread through. As the wires of the fountain splashed around him, she leaned in and drew the wire through his mane, across his chest, then asked for his touch. Soon she asked for his kiss, and with that, he answered. For Carrot, suddenly he understood what the well meant, wondered if it were even possible to be happier than he was in this moment. For Cupcake, the same question lingered. As they painted that scene together in the fountain, their love blossomed as never before, and a breeze caught around them. My children, came a voice unheard on the breeze. "I am so happy for you. So very happy. Keep this time. Let your love grow," it continued, making the lanterns dance slightly around them. "But know that this is not the end. The game goes on, I'm afraid. The game is not yet over, and there are new players taking the field." The breeze swirled as they lifted their heads and stared down at one another with tenderness flying between them. The breeze continued in an unheard tone. "I am sorry, but it does. Soon you will know that the world is not what you expect of it. There will be pain. It will hurt. I am so sorry, but it must be that way. For her to be who she must be. For you to become what you need to be. This is another way it must unfold. But you will be rewarded. I swear it. Just trust your love to one another." The breeze held still and hovered among the lanterns. With that, Cupcake lowered herself once more. A defiant giggle, the breeze sped off across the grassy fields, where the fireflies lit the trails of the night.